Hi there, and welcome back to the show. Today we have Saurav. Today's topic is AI, industrial mobility, and supply chain, looking beyond self-driving cars and trucks. And our tagline is $1 billion a week is spent on workplace injuries in the US. Can AI solve this? Our guest Saurav is a co-founder and CEO of SIERA.AI, an Austin-based industrial mobility automation company. He received his bachelor's in engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay in 2010, then went on to get an MS at Cranfield University in the UK in 2011, and then got his Ph.D. at Texas A&M in 2017. He has 11 years of robotics and autonomous systems experience and has filed over 10 patents in related research. He's worked at Qualcomm and R&D in 2015, where he won the Qualcomm Padovani Fellow. He's also won a National Innovation Award for his research in navigation technologies and has worked on self-driving cars and self-flying drones. He enjoys making music, cooking, and building new technologies. Thanks for joining us on the show.
Thanks, David, for having me on your show.
So you're going to be the first guest here that has a physical product in terms of there's an actual unit that's being shipped that combines some physical component as well as some software component. How does one get launched in this field? Because I imagine there's a lot of barriers to entry once you have to deal with physical product.
Yep, absolutely, David. So as they say in the startup, world, hardware startups are hard, right? So we take a software-first approach to shipping product to our customers. The challenge typically, whenever you're dealing with physical devices is, dealing with supply chain. And as you know, globally, supply chains are pretty messed up. There's a huge lag built up. There's a Suez Canal blockage. So you have to deal with all of those things. And obviously, R&D timeframes are a little longer. Even if you're not building a chip, for example, but you're putting hardware together to make a product work, there's still R&D involved. So R&D timeframes are a little longer and costlier. But the end result is that the product is far more stickier because once a customer adopts it, they can't really keep switching it out, every 3 months, 6 months, or a year. So typically in a SaaS contract, you may have annual deals. In our world, you can have 5-year deals. So you have way more customer retention and stickiness with the product. So there's the pluses and minuses dealing with hardware.
How did you go from more of a academic heavy background into the manufacturing component? Like how did you solve that question? Or did you have a guide or mentor who helped walk you through that process?
I've had several guides and mentors, in my journey. So let's start with why did I choose to make that decision? And, typically what we like to do at Sierra is, and I love this philosophy of, and Simon Sinek says the same thing, is why, what, how, right? So start with the why, and then you can define the what, and then, you figure out the details of how you execute it. So the why for, moving from academia to entrepreneurship, and specifically in the industrial sector is, I've always had a bug to build something of my own. So I was foolish enough to start my first startup in the first year of my PhD, thinking I could do a PhD and a startup at the same time. That startup was called GuideBuddy, and that was essentially like an Airbnb, but for booking local travel guides instead of a place to stay. So I could come to Houston, David, where you are, and book you as my travel guide, in a non-COVID world. And did that, learned a lot, built a team, built a product, scaled it, did it entirely bootstrapped, but switched back to my PhD. So, ramped that down because it was taking away a lot of my time and money, and I had to focus on my PhD. But
How much were you sleeping during this time of your life?
I think I was still getting 6 to 7 hours of
Okay.
sleep. I don't compromise on sleep. If I
Okay.
get good sleep, I can work.
Okay.
Yeah, but no nap time and barely any weekends. So, coming out of the PhD, I knew that I didn't want to go work for a big company. I mean, I worked at Qualcomm, really enjoyed it, but I saw the constraints of working at a big company. Things move slow, and you don't really have ownership of the direction, right? So in my PhD, I worked on self-driving vehicles. How do they navigate on their own and things like that. And then as I was coming out of the PhD, I knew that I wanted to try my hand at building a company again, and went to the National Science Foundation and got a little bit of funding from them. And that program is called the NSF course. So any academic who's looking to or thinking about getting into business, I highly recommend that they get into that program. It was the Lean Startup program, basically, funded by the government. And
So how did
so
you discover this program?
actually through my university.
Okay.
There was a talk that I attended, and they said, look, there's this program, and if you're interested in entrepreneurship after your graduate degree, go for it. So I actually got selected for the National I-Corps program. and the government gave us 50K to just go travel and meet people. That's it, to meet potential
Huh.
customers. Yeah,
Okay.
so it's like $50,000 of sales and marketing budget, basically. You can't spend it on R&D. You can't at all.
Huh.
So that's the condition. So anyway, met with a lot of big warehousing, manufacturing companies, and kind of patterns started to emerge. All of them would say, look, we've got these huge investments in industrial mobility. We've got, massive fleets of forklifts and other heavy industrial vehicles. We've got, million square foot warehouses, but we've got a lot of problems dealing with labor shortages, dealing with accidents and injuries, and dealing with damages. I said, look, I think we can take the technologies that, we've been working on for the last 10, 12 years, or I've been working on, and there should be a way to bring this into the world and, and solve an immediate business problem. Although I had a job offer from a self-driving car company, I decided not to take that because in my gut, I knew that self-driving cars were, at least 1 to 2 decades away. And that's turning out to be true, right? And but going to a warehouse or a factory, those problems are more immediate and solvable, more tractable. That's the why I got into
Okay.
manufacturing and industrial sector. Now, what to do there? There's so many problems to solve, but I wanted to be in mobility. That's my background, robotics, and because everybody kept saying, "Look, we have these fleets, we can't really throw them away and buy robots," and the robots that are in the market are kind of like Gen 1, V1 that don't really do most of the stuff that we need them to
Okay.
do. So people still are needed, but can you help us make the people more productive, more efficient? And that's how we got started.
Hmm.
So
So
go ahead.
go ahead.
So how, that last part is how we did that. I partnered with my co-founder, took the learnings from the National Science Foundation I-Core program, and then just went out and started. We booked our first pilot customer without having the product in hand, and once we got the pilot contract booked, then we went and raised some capital and started building the product and doing trials and R&D and that kind of stuff.
So how do you define the scope of your MVP? Like one of the hardest problems is not getting into the realm of like constantly increasing scope. So how do you
Right.
choose this is the defined set of features we want for the first version and that's it? Like
It's
what was that
hard.
process like?
It's a
Okay,
very
hard.
hard process.
Okay.
Typically, especially if you're an engineer, you want to build the perfect solution or the ideal solution, but you quickly learn that you can't do that with limited budgets and time frames. And so we actually started off by building a self-driving system that can be retrofitted onto an existing vehicle. As we did that, we quickly realized that that is quite complex. And even if you build a really good self-driving system, because of the limitations in the technology and costs and budgets at the customer side, what you can do for them is limited in
Hmm.
terms of like you can maybe move things from point A to point B. But a customer needs a solution that can go into a truck, unload a truck, go into a warehouse, put things into a rack. They need the whole gamut.
Hmm.
But we quickly learned that what people really liked was the safety aspect. So there was an interesting study done by PwC on industrial mobility within the four walls of a factory. And 32% of people interviewed in that survey said that the only reason they wanted to invest in automation was because they wanted to increase safety.
I see.
And 81% of the people who invested in autonomous robots got zero cost savings by investing in them. So
Huh, okay, I
that
see.
was, real eye opener. So what we did was we said, okay, let's focus on safety. Let's take the same technologies and limit the scope and focus on like collision avoidance, pedestrian awareness, accident prevention, and solve their immediate business problems like digitization of paper-based processes and fleet management. So that was the pivot that we made.
I see. So in terms of the core, the physical thing that you built, what were like the initial sensors that it had to have, and what were the integrations it had to have with I guess, all the assets and vehicles that your clients have?
So what we build right now is our flagship product is called the SIERA.AI Safety System S3. What it is, it's a bolt-on device with basically like AI cameras and a computer and a touchscreen, three elements. So the AI cameras are monitoring the environment around the vehicle and alerting the operator for the presence of obstacles or pedestrians, right? And the operator can choose to slow down the vehicle, take a decision, or ignore it, right? So if the operator ignores it, our system has the ability to send a signal down to the vehicle to slow it down automatically to mitigate risk.
Hmm.
And then there's this touchscreen, which is basically used by the operator to get the visual alerts. And it also lets them complete their daily OSHA checklist. So just FYI, OSHA requires that every industrial vehicle before operation be inspected for safe use. And every operator, it's mandatory. If you don't do it, you get a $10,000 fine. So the operators, they do it on paper today, and we completely digitize that. Because this device is cellular connected, we don't really need any integration into the customer's IT system, so it's very plug and play.
So how do you actually control the vehicle? Like, is there like a physical button that like moves the levers and whatnot, or is it like are you able to like, I don't know, like hijack the digital system?
Yeah, so no, we don't have like robotic arms controlling the gas pedals and things like that, because that would be so expensive that there would be no point in buying it, right? So what we do is we do it digitally by sending a specific signal to the vehicle's controller and letting it know that it needs to slow down. And for
that's pretty neat.
We invented actually a custom integration middleware, which we call the SIERA integration module. And you can think of it as like a middleware to abstract any forklift with a common set of software APIs. So we've taken a hardware, a forklift or an industrial vehicle, and turned that into a software by exposing APIs to control it.
Is the set of all forklifts and their control systems very broad, or is it relatively narrow?
If you look at pictures or videos of forklifts, from any manufacturer, they pretty much look the same, and they have the same functionality. Go forward, go back, turn, and then lift something up and down. So it's the same functionality, but how they get executed on different brands of vehicles is different, because they have different control systems, like different brand of controllers, different logic. But at the end of the day, the fundamentals are the same. I
see. How many people or how many factories do you feel you had to visit before you were like, I am confident this is the solution?
Last we did a count up till now. So from beginning to now, we've spoken to more than 350 VPs of operations. I believe that during our initial research phase, roughly visited about 12 warehouses and about 4 factories to get a sense for what was happening. But you get a lot of information by just talking to the leadership, the safety managers, the operations managers, and then they invite you in, and then you go look at those operations to get a sense and feel for what's happening.
So it's usually them inviting you. So it's not like you're not messaging strangers on LinkedIn saying like, "Hey, can I get a tour of your factory?"
That doesn't happen.
Okay, all right. That's what I figured.
Nobody has time to do that.
Okay, that's what I figured. Okay. So how does the conversation start from you not knowing the person to you getting a tour of their factory?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, right? That's the $1 million question. When you have nothing in your early days, how do you get somebody to buy from you, right? When you don't have a brand, you don't have proven success. So we had to rely on referrals, warm referrals, introductions from people that we know to get leads, and then we would talk to them about the problem, and we would just say, look, we're new, we don't really have like the best solution in the world right now because we're building it, but we do think that we have a unique approach to solving this problem, because this is a problem that is not addressed, not solved, period. And that's why the customer would let us in and talk to us, and because they had a really severe problem that they wanted solving.
Do you find that there's significant overlap between the technical problem you're solving within your business and the technical problems you've, researched and studied in your Ph.D. program?
Quite a few amount of overlap. I think, computer vision, the way that we use it today, a lot of it I did it in my PhD and master, so that was very helpful. So I would say it's 50-50. 50% of the stuff on the AI and the perception and the planning side, have experience with it. There's a lot of new stuff, right? Understanding the technicalities of how the user experience should be is completely new, right? How does a forklift really work in the real world? It was new to me, right? And how does a real forklift operator drive a forklift? What you realize is that they don't care, and they just bump it into things, and that's why there's a lot of accidents and injuries. And forklifts get what they call rack rash. They keep hitting racks in the warehouse.
I see.
And within 6 months, they look 6 years old. So half of it was overlap, I would say.
So within a warehouse with a forklift operating, does the different specifications of forklifts in terms of like how high it can lift things, or it's like turning radius or all that sort of stuff, substantially make your problem more difficult to solve, or do you find that your middleware is able to address all of that?
We can address most of it now. Obviously, in the early days, we had limited capabilities, and we expanded those capabilities by adding feature sets over time. Right now, we can deal with pretty much any kind of vehicle in an indoor setting, so
I
inside
see.
a factory or a warehouse. Yeah.
So the range of forklift lift height is roughly standardized. Is that fair to say?
Uh, yes and no.
Okay.
So like you get different configurations, and it depends on the warehouse application. Like if you have racks that go only 3 levels high, then you only need a forklift that can lift 3 levels high.
Hmm.
So, but again, then there's specific kinds of applications called very narrow aisle, where you have racks that are very close together and very specific custom built vehicles that go forward and back within those aisles, and you can't have two at a time. So in a nutshell, there's a lot of different kinds of vehicles that go and do different things. Some vehicles take the person up, some vehicles only take the load up. And it depends on the application. In e-commerce, you will see a lot of vehicles where the person goes up to pick like a box of clothing from a rack and then put it onto a pallet. But in manufacturing, you'll see a forklift that lifts, maybe a 5,000 pound load only 10 feet high.
Is the artificial intelligence done on the device itself, or is there like a centralized server that it goes to?
We do it on the device, but
Okay, on
then
the device.
the data is kind of stored and then transmitted to the cloud where it's further analyzed.
I see. And is that through like Wi-Fi?
Cellular. We can do
Cellular.
Wi-Fi, but we rely on cellular now. With our latest generation of the product, we stick to cellular.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is that cellular something you had to negotiate with one of the major like cellular providers, or is that they just plug in their own SIM card, or how does it work?
When you get the device, it's literally plug and play. You power it
I
on
see.
and you go. So it comes pre-configured with a a cellular provider SIM card. And yes, we work with one of the major cell networks to provision our devices and to have special
Okay.
rates. Yep.
Do you know how much data you consume per SIM card?
It depends on which product. Like
Okay.
for the digital checklist and impact monitoring, which is we call S2, it digitizes their paper inspections and also tracks the G forces, the shocks. So it lets our customer know when there's some forklift hit something. I think we can do up to 500 megabits of transfer a month. We stay
Okay.
under that. But
Okay.
then there's the S3, the safety system, which can send visual logs. So that can, we do up to 2 GB a month. But
I see.
if the customer is going higher, then we can switch them to a bigger data plan.
I see.
Yep.
So you learn about your technical domain from your schooling. What about your business domain? How do you learn all the things that it takes to run a business that are not necessarily taught in traditional education systems?
By making
Was
a
that
lot
through
of
GuideBuddy,
mistakes.
or did you through Okay. Tell me about that.
By making a lot of mistakes. Yeah, some of it I learned through GuideBuddy, but because I made a lot of mistakes, learning about product market fit, market segmentation, go to market. But again, the concepts that I developed there were rough concepts, and then had to be really honed in over time. But thankfully, my co-founder is an experienced entrepreneur. He sold 2 companies, so I relied on him for the business expertise, and kind of absorbed that, and just read a lot of books and training videos. And then very recently, we actually got a business coach who's been super helpful to us in streamlining our processes and our thinking for go-to-market.
How'd you find this coach?
YouTube.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, he had a lot of good videos on YouTube, so I was watching him for a while, and then in one of his videos, he just said, "Look, by the way, I run this training program. If you want to join, click here." So just landed, talked to him, and then I absolutely loved the program.
Is this a name that I'd be familiar with?
Our coach's name is TK Cater. So
Okay.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but
Not yet. I'm always on the lookout.
for any entrepreneur, he's actually based in Dallas, so we're all Texas.
Oh, okay.
For any entrepreneur, I would say, yeah, I mean, if you know everything and you've done this before, great. But if you haven't and you need help, don't be afraid to get help, and do it early on, and get a coach. It really helps. But get a good coach. There's a lot of wannabe coaches out there that will ping you on LinkedIn and suck your time and your money and not give you results. So make sure you go with a good coach.
How can someone identify a bad coach?
That's a good question. You didn't ask how can someone identify a good coach.
I imagine there's more bad coaches than good ones.
Yeah,
I imagine the good ones are so full that they don't take on new clients. That's the problem.
That's right, actually. So the good coaches will say, let's talk, and if it's a fit, maybe we can work together. They don't want to work with you just because
Yeah.
you can part with some money. I think the bad coaches are the ones that don't really have real entrepreneurship experience.
Okay.
That, I would say, no offense to anybody, but the worst business coaches are those that come out of big corporates without startup experience, pretending to be startup coaches. It just doesn't. The experience doesn't transfer that well.
Right. Okay, sounds good. How'd you meet your co-founder?
I actually knew him from before.
Okay.
We'd been friends for a while, and he's older than me, and actually his wife and my mom had worked together in the past, so we had a
Hmm.
history of knowing each other for almost 20 years.
Oh wow, that's a good amount of time.
Yeah,
One of the hardest things about finding co-founders, you need to find someone you can trust for the long term, and it's unfortunate a lot of startups fail simply due to co-founder disputes. So it's cool to have that 20-year long journey to like get to know someone.
absolutely. Yeah, very helpful.
My co-founder is about a decade older than me, and there's definitely like differences in worldview, and I actually really appreciate having the different perspectives presented and just seeing the pros and cons of each side.
Absolutely. From my experience, like, because I was less experienced in go-to-market and sales, it was huge learning for me to see how my co-founder would run a sales call or deal with a customer, and really, help me hone my own skills in that domain. And I would say that obviously being the young guy, I was more impatient, and then you quickly realize that you can be impatient with action, but you have to be patient with results.
Right, right.
So learn to be patient with results.
You really like Simon Sinek, I can tell.
It's been a while since I read his books, but yes.
Do you find it difficult to build an engineering team? I imagine computer vision isn't the most common specialty for software engineers.
Building an engineering team is hard, very hard, I would say. It's been one of the hardest jobs at SIERA.AI. The reason is when you start off, if you start off with a big VC check, that's great. You start off with your $2 million, $4 million investment. You can go
Right.
hire strong engineers and pay them top dollar. We didn't start that way. We raised money from
Okay.
angels, small amounts, and then quickly make a little bit of progress, then raise more money. Went more the traditional route, and being in Austin, you kind of have to go that route.
Mm.
Um, and yes, the challenge is that how do you hire strong engineers with a limited budget? So you have to start with younger engineers with less experience, and work with them. They learn on the job as well, and so things may take a little longer. And you have to kind of learn with them and help them. And then as you grow, mature, you make progress, you raise funding. You have to transition and hire more senior engineers, more experienced engineers. But the problem is the best engineers, the 10x engineers as we like to call them, they're not looking for jobs because there's a shortage of them, huge shortage of engineers. So
Right.
the biggest nightmare right now we have is finding those 10x engineers and bringing them to work for SIERA.
So when you find one of these more junior engineers, what do you look for if it's not experience? Like what qualities in them as a person that you think is good predictors of future success?
Motivation, hunger, and drive. Right? If you went to a decent school, and you know your stuff, you can answer all the technical questions, you pass the technical interview, we still look for motivation, hunger, and drive, because you can get people who are technically sound and then just culturally not a fit, and they turn out to be the excuse makers and whatever crap, and you don't want to work with them, and they spoil the whole company atmosphere. I think
Right,
Elon
right.
Musk, in one of his very recent interviews, or maybe past, said, I always know that I should hire for attitude, but I've made the mistake of hiring for high IQ, and it always turns out to be a mistake, because the people who really work out or deliver the best results are the people with high motivation and hunger. Skills can be taught, attitude is hard to teach.
So how do you vet this in the interview process? Like how do you discern someone's hunger, motivation, and drive?
So that's a hard question to answer. You do that by stress testing them, and you see if they get frustrated or they play along, right?
Okay.
You ask them blunt questions like, "What was your last success? Why?" And then, okay, what was your top project? And then when they answer that, you say, "Okay, what was your number 2 project?" And when they answer that, you say, "What's your number 3 project?" And the best candidates are more than eager to tell you about that, and they stay patient and they go through it. But I'd say that that's an acquired skill.
Okay.
Hiring is a skill that you acquire over time. But there was a really good book that I read called "Never Hire a Bad Salesperson," and it turns out that the way that book is written, those interview skills can be used for non-salespeople hires as well. So I would highly recommend somebody to read that book early on. It's very helpful.
What are some of the TLDRs you've gotten out of the book?
Basically, in a nutshell, you break the interview down into the culture fit part and the conversational part into sections. And in each section you test, one section you test motivation, next section you test competitiveness, next section you test, how they respond to failure. And in each section, you basically break it down into a few simple questions. And all you have to do is keep peeling the onion, right? If you ask a question and somebody gives you a non-specific answer, ask for specific details. If they answer that question, ask like, what's your top project? You may answer that with less detail, so I want more detail. Okay, you answered it. What's your next top project? And then you score them, basically. And if they're scoring 4 and 5, you hire them. If they're scoring 3 or less, or there's more 3s than 4 5s, don't hire them. No matter how good their CV looks, don't hire them.
Have you ever made it higher based on the CV and then later regretted it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Have you? What's the percentage of the time where you feel like a CV is a good predictor?
0.
Okay, that's a new number. Okay.
Well, okay. So I'm being a little facetious. A strong CV. Let's say you went to a really good school, and you worked at a top company, and you have a strong CV. So that tells me that it's an indicator for intelligence and hard work. So it's good. But I'm not going to hire you based on your CV. No matter how senior you are, I need to talk to you. I need to get some references. I need to check you out. I will never hire somebody purely by looking at their CV. And some people just don't write good CVs, but you can miss out on the diamond in the rough.
And that problem is doubly true in the engineering world, where I feel like engineers are generally very, very. I think they're by nature imbalanced in their personalities, in their skill set, etc. Because they double down on a very niche set of things they're really passionate about, and to the potential detriment of like other skills that are not necessarily in that core territory.
Right. So when we hire for engineers, we also look for a little bit of marketing skills in them.
Okay. That's rare.
Because in an early startup, in an early stage startup, your engineers also have to be your customer support people, right?
Yes.
And they also have to be your sales engineers.
Yes.
So you kind of need them to have all those skills in one.
Okay. That's a lot to ask for a junior engineer, new grad, or equivalent. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. So you can if you have good attitude, you can train them. Sorry, go ahead.
How do you go about finding these people? Like, do you just go to career fairs? Do you post to online forums? Do you like try to poach them from other companies on LinkedIn? What's your strategy?
It's all of the above, right?
Okay.
Career fairs, AngelList, Indeed, post on job boards, post on LinkedIn, ask for referrals from friends, ask for referrals from your investors and on your current engineers. So early days when we didn't have anybody, we got people through AngelList and through LinkedIn. Now because we have a team, we have started getting good referrals from our own internal team, so that really helps.
Okay. What would you say some of your key takeaways from your past experience, either in academia or through your previous companies, that you think are key lessons that you're really glad that you have now?
That's it's always one of those 3-step. Let me give you my 3-step guide to startup success. Right. The first one is that always work with good people. It's all about the people. So you have to be very selective about the people that you partner with, because if they're bad people, by definition, by associating with them, your name gets spoiled. And in business, your brand is everything. Like your personal brand matters a lot. So work with good people. The second thing is that you're going to need help, and you're not going to know everything. So be open to change, and have one simple mindset. You're going to be wrong about most things, so your job is to be less wrong. And I think it's Elon Musk who said that. And but how can you be less wrong? Go find good people, good mentors, and learn from them, but make your own decisions. The fallacy is sometimes people are too hungry for advice, and then they listen to too many people and get confused. So don't get stuck in paralysis of analysis. Take decisions based on advice, but take your own decisions. And the third thing is move fast, take decisions. No decision is perfect, just take decisions. And some will work, some won't, but as long as you keep making decisions, you will learn what are the thinking patterns to make better decisions. And soon you'll start making better decisions, and that's it.
The first point you mentioned was partnering with good people. Have you ever had a scenario where you saw an interested prospect who wanted to become a client, but you just felt like there wasn't a good culture fit, and then you decided not to take them on as a client?
Um, no, that has not happened yet.
Okay.
Like not taking on a customer because we don't have a good culture fit with them. That has not happened. But definitely not hired people because we didn't have a good culture fit, or have let
Right,
people go
right.
because it wasn't a good culture fit.
What advice do you wish you knew from the very, very beginning? I guess 3 years ago.
Uh, I think it's common sense advice. It always takes longer. It always costs more, and it's harder than you think, right?
Mm.
But specific advice is, let's break it down into three things: like product, go to market, and then fundraising, right? So on the product side, you need to hire engineers in a specific age group or experience band for building a tech startup in the early days. If you hire engineers that are fresh out of school, all the skills have to be taught on the job, so you lose time in that. If you hire engineers on the other end who are too senior, they may want to be looking to move into a management role, or they may not be looking to learn new skills. So you need to find engineers with that 8 to 10 year experience who are still hungry and motivated to, rise up, but have enough experience to do the job. And ideally, you want to hire people who've already done the same thing somewhere else or done similar
Right,
things,
right.
right? It's hard, but if that was drilled into my brain earlier, probably would have, could have made better hiring decisions, right? So that's on the product side. On the go-to-market side, one thing I learned from the coach, and this applies actually across the board, is if you want to do something, make sure you write down a strategy, because once you write it down, then you have to measure yourself against it. So write it down. If you want to do something, if you have an idea, write it down. If you have a thought about a strategy, write it down, and then measure and test over time. And you have to have pig-headed discipline, right? You have to be almost an a-hole with the people that you're working with sometimes, because you have to annoy them and drill down and be like, okay, did we do this right?
Right.
Are we meeting our metric? And it really, sometimes it gets on people's nerves, like, why do I have to do this every week? But we have to, because if you can't measure it, you can't improve. So, watch your business like a hawk, basically. And on the fundraising side, I think, again, fundraising is not a sequential process, it's a parallel process. So you have to, run after multiple investors at the same time. And at the same time, from a computer science approach, it's a breadth first search. So parallel breadth first search, you can't, it's a no until it's a yes. So don't assume that it's a yes just because the investor said that they'll take the next meeting or they found it interesting. Right? So I think those are the lessons learned.
When you're talking to investors, what's their understanding of the computer vision world? Are they generally very, very deep in it, or like what's the level of translation that needs to occur between like a PhD level expert and someone who's more of a layman?
I think the good thing about tech investors, like good tech investors, is they understand the technology
Okay.
to a certain extent, so that they're not, talking nonsense. I have not met too many investors who just didn't know what they were talking about. On the other hand, when you're dealing with angels, though, you can get into a situation where the angel is not familiar. But
Okay.
again, the good angels will say, look, I don't know this, so I'll look to a friend for help. Sometimes you come across people who think they know everything, but they actually don't know anything. So partial knowledge is the most dangerous thing. And then they will beat you down on something that that they're obviously wrong, and you just have to kind of step back and say, okay, you do you.
Do you feel like there's limitations to AI at some point at a practical level with today's hardware? Or do you feel like the domain that you're tackling, it's well scoped enough that it's relatively non-trivial?
I think like it's somewhere in the middle, right? Some
Okay.
problems are now very easy to solve, and some problems are still very hard. Like object detection and classification. Some people would say it's a solved problem, but you don't have 100% accuracy
Right.
rate, right? So how do you get close to 100%, and how do you make it run at low cost? Taking those things from R&D, where conceptually the problem is solved, into the real world where it has to work as a hardened industrial grade application, for 24 hours, 365 days, 5 years, 7 years. That's the challenge. That's the bridge that the AI industry is crossing.
Do you have a like feature roadmap or like rollout like roadmap that you have for yourself for call it for like the next X duration of time?
Yep, we do quarterly roadmaps, and then we assign confidence levels to how confident we are we can deliver that roadmap. So it starts with like, we would say at the beginning of a quarter, we always keep some stretch goals. So we say we are 80% confident, and then 60, and then 40, and then so on. So yes, we do quarterly and annual roadmaps.
How accurate are those? Like how far in the future do you think you can project with at least loose accuracy of your like 1 year roadmap?
I would say that it's easy to predict up to 2 quarters. Like 1 quarter is, you can be fairly confident. And again, in an early stage, it's difficult, but as you get more mature, it becomes easier. So yeah, I think we can do good, strong confidence 1 quarter, and then, fair confidence 2 quarters. But after that, things are hazy because a lot depends on the resources, the customer demands, and where the market is going, and lots of other things.
So where was it in the life cycle where you started to do quarterly planning as a concept? Because I imagine day one really doesn't make sense because you don't even know what happens the next day. Yeah.
We started doing quarterly engineering roadmaps beginning of Q4 last year.
Okay. And that's roughly about 1.5 years into your business, is that right?
You could say roughly 2.5 years into the business.
2.5 years? Okay.
Right. But I think we could have started a little earlier, definitely. But again, when you hire your dedicated VP of engineering, then it's easier to do those kind of things. Also, when you have a small team, it's easy to work on sprint basis. So what we would do is, we wouldn't have quarterly and yearly roadmaps, but what we would have is a 30, 60, 90. So in the extremely early days, your horizon is 30 days. Then it becomes 60 days. Then it becomes 90 days. So as you get more mature, your horizon increases. Now we can look up to a year. So in the early days, we would do a 30, 60, 90.
Do you keep track of the number of incidents that you prevent?
Yeah. In 2020, we prevented more than 11,000 incidents.
Do you keep track of that as a function of time? You see like an exponential graph. Is that something that you're seeing as a company?
We do track that over time. Yeah, across businesses. We can't release that data because it's sensitive data. So,
For sure.
So we can't really share that. But we can, in aggregate, we prevented about 11,000 accidents. We know trends like accident rates go up on weekends and during night shifts. And then during peak season, those rates go up because there's a lot of temporary workers that get hired. So those kind of trends are pretty visible.
How strong is the network effect in the sense that when you take on a new client, you deploy X amount of cameras on their vehicles, and those cameras feed back into the AI program that figures out what is and isn't worthwhile to slow down or stop or make some safety intervention. Is there a strong network effect, or is it more on the loose side?
I would say early days it was loose. Now it's stronger.
Okay.
Because now the vision system can learn over time. Those capabilities have been built in. Earlier it was offline data collection, then train the models. Now it's kind of like almost live, because now all the data is going to the cloud, and you can take that data and just run an engine on the back end to learn from that data. And in terms of network effects, I would say that some things have a lot of network effect. Like if a person looks like a person in one e-commerce warehouse like this, then very similar in another e-commerce warehouse.
I see.
But if you go to a meat packing factory, they may be wearing a lot of different PPE, hair nets, and things like that. So you have to learn that. So that may not transfer to e-commerce, but that transfers to other meat packing. So yes, there's between sectors or industry verticals, there's loose network effects, but within the industry verticals, there's strong network effects.
Are you aware of competitors that do something similar to what you do?
Yeah, there are some competitors. Most of them are using 90s technology, and they're old, and they don't have the feature set. They don't do proactive safety. That's the big difference is there are competitors out there in the market, but they don't do proactive. They don't do prevention, and we are the leaders in the field doing prevention. But there is one European company that does prevention, and so we are aware of them, and we actually hired their VP of sales. So he now works for us.
What's the point of the technology if it doesn't lead to prevention?
Right. I think they just didn't have the capability to build the technology. Okay. So they were just recording accidents and just letting people know that you had this many accidents. And this is the G-force. It helps in certain cases, but the reason customers come to us is because they're like, what they say is, hey, I've put flashing lights everywhere. I've got horns everywhere. I've tried, guardrails everywhere. And I've even tried those expensive telematics solutions, but nothing works. Why? Because people keep making the same mistakes. That's why they need somebody like SIERA.AI.
So let's go the other direction where we fast forward a decade and let's say every factory, every forklift on the planet has your technology on it. What's the next thing for either you as a company or you as a person?
So for SIERA.AI as a company, I think much before the 10-year mark, we will start transitioning customers from the driver assistance to self-driving systems. So
I see.
as the technology matures, as the customers move towards more automation, we'll be their partners in transitioning them to hands-free, driverless systems. And I believe that there's a strong opportunity for us to kind of just own the market for that. Interestingly,
like self-driving forklifts, am I understanding that correctly? Okay.
Yeah, self-driving systems. More on the software side, though. We prefer taking a software-first approach. We don't want to build the forklifts, but we can do all the software. But if you look at Jeff Bezos' recent annual shareholder letter, his last one before he stepped down as CEO, he said Amazon is going to invest $300 million in safety technology in 2021, and out of that, $66 million on forklift safety. So it's a serious problem.
Yeah.
Amazon is building a solution for itself. That means the rest of the world also needs a solution, but there isn't anybody really delivering what we do. So we have a strong opportunity to go out and own this market.
Are you interested in being acquired, or are you more interested in like finding your own path to, I don't know, direct listing or an IPO?
I think it's a tough question to answer. It depends on always where the market is, how the company is doing, and what the long-term roadmap is, right? It's a decision that typically is taken by the board involving, the board as the founders, investors, and so on and so forth. We are open to both. It just depends on is it the right opportunity.
So imagine it seems like you've talked about a lot of things in terms of like the scope of the things you're trying to do, both in the short term and long term. How do you balance that with the things you want to do in your personal life and things you want to do, I don't know, just to recuperate? Like, how many hours do you sleep? How many hours do you rest on a given week or so?
So I don't compromise on sleep. That's the one thing I realized very early on. I've never compromised on my sleep, because if I did, it really spoils the next day, and I don't get productivity, and I'm irritable, and what's the point of that? So I do get my 7 to 8 hours of sleep, but I've kind of broken my day down into like specific time windows. And so the first 2 hours of the day are like the most critical. And if you win the first 2 hours of the day, you win the day. So that's like, wake up, coffee, workout, running, gym, some kind of exercise, and then you freshen up, breakfast, and then you get to work. What I do next is and I've been doing this more religiously since 2021, is write down my top 5 for the day, like top 5 tasks to dos, and I can't, end my work day until I do those. And so that I know what I have to do, and then I can allocate the rest of the time to responding to people's questions or helping them out or collaboration, but I have my own tasks, so that really helps. It's a 6 to 7 day work week, but when I'm with my wife in Toledo, I take the weekend to spend time with her, but when I'm in Austin, I'm pretty much working. So it's minimum 6 day work week, and that's how it has to be in the early years.
How long do you plan to sustain that for, or do you plan to do that indefinitely?
Interesting question. I've almost seen my dad do that. So he's a physician, and he would work 6 days a week. So I don't find it to be like I don't like this concept of like work day, week, and weekend. Like,
right.
If you truly enjoy what you do, it sounds cheesy, but if you enjoy it, doesn't feel like work. You're just doing what you love. So for me, it's like, I'm not counting days. It's just do what you have to do.
Is there anything that keeps you up at night?
Lots of different things. It could be, if you have an open role and you need to hire somebody because you need to deliver on a feature roadmap and you don't have enough resources to execute that. That's always a big challenge, right? So hiring is definitely one of the big challenges. Right now, supply chain is what keeps me up at night, because to ship physical devices, you need to make sure you have inventory, or at least line of sight to acquire inventory and then deliver it to the customer. So that's one of my big worries right now these days.
So how do you handle those scenarios where there's things outside of your control? Like, for example, supply chain. Like, I imagine everyone's supply chain has been disrupted for a good amount of time now, especially when you're talking about anything that deals with circuitry, just because there's been a huge shift in that world.
2 beers and a shot of whiskey.
Okay. Common answer.
Yeah. Sometimes you just can't do anything, so you just have to wait.
Okay.
Yeah. But you look for alternatives. You look for, for one part, we have like 3 distributors, but they didn't have anything. So we actually went to eBay and started buying from random people and, used or whatever for internal testing. And then we would go find somebody who had 2 new spares lying around. So we would buy that and doing what we have to do.
So we've talked about what it takes, or some of the things what it takes in terms of hiring engineers. What about hiring more like leadership level roles? What do you look for in a leader?
In a leader, you typically look for, again, hunger and motivation. Like, are they still hungry enough that they want to grow, or have they reached a stagnation level and they don't feel the need to grow? You look for past leadership experience. You're looking for people who understand that that magic science of managing people, and can work and create an atmosphere where the ownership is with the people who are doing the jobs, and the leaders have the ability to set the context and drive the vision and execute the vision. That's the kind of people that we look for, and those are not easy to find.
Right. And the thing about leaders who have prior experience is that they're usually likely in those positions still.
Yeah.
And usually at a fairly well compensated roles as well.
Right. They're highly compensated. Difficult to get them out of their old job. You have to run a whole sales campaign to get them out.
Are you the person that does the leadership hires, or is it both you and your co-founder, or is it like
both me and my co-founder?
Okay.
Yeah. We both have to do it. It has to pass both of our smell test. If one of us vetoes it, we don't hire that person.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, thank you for your time. I just have one last question. What's the best way for our viewers to get in touch with you?
So the best way is just to visit our website, www.SIERA.AI, or hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm active on LinkedIn. Just search Saurav Agarwal SIERA.AI on LinkedIn, and I'm right there.